course.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, these very common drugs, because what they, you know, the illegality, of course, is an artificial thing. It's not a natural phenomenon, the notion of something being illegal. I mean, the idea that you've made a plant illegal is quite a bizarre idea if you think about it. That plant's illegal, okay? And so what really, I would suggest, precipitates people's interest in exploring the effects of substances on their minds and on their bodies probably really comes down to the very first psychotropic drug they try, which for many people, well, Andrew Weil, who was a researcher writing in the 70s, would say that even children will roll down a hill and get dizzy. They love that sense of being dizzy, and I think probably most of us, I certainly remember doing that myself, twirling around and falling over, and that was great. But then you go on from that, and you end up trying beer and so on, and beer is beer is a powerful intoxicant. It's a powerful psychoactive drug. And people will have it, and they'll give it to their children. And we've probably got a variety of views on that. But as a consequence of that, you are altering your consciousness. Why would you not want to try something else? And particularly if it's made all sexy, like, oh, that's illegal, but half the country does it. Okay, well, let's give that a go. And as we'll see when we look at the discourse next week, the views of the people that I interviewed were very clear about their use of cannabis and why they preferred cannabis to alcohol. They were very clear about that, and one of the main reasons that they did not like, that they preferred cannabis, was they did not like the effects of alcohol. And so the argument being made there, and I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but the argument being made there is that these people would say that they are making a rational choice. But of course, drug use is typically aligned, and particularly illegal drug use, is typically aligned with lack of control, deviancy, criminality, pathology. So you have a tension.
Even in Dunedin, there's sort of institutionalized, it's not any organized thing, but just everybody in any position of power has this feeling like, oh, I better keep a lid on that to keep my own position. And I mean, a good example of that is with all of the work that we do with the 420s is to try to break down that stigma of the cannabis user, but because we are drug users, we just sort of get written off. But we're trying to show that we're not shooting up, we're like university students and stuff. But then as soon as we sort of went beyond that to try to, you know, bring out information like what Professor Nutt writes about, we had a whole session dedicated to that, a whole week dedicated to basically Professor Nutt's findings last year, comparing alcohol and cannabis, and that's what resulted in my arrest, not the smoking for years and years.
And as I say, it's on the one hand, you can see that people have put themselves in the crosshairs as people who are engaging in civil disobedience, such as yourself. You can say, well, yeah, you're going to be an obvious target in that sense. But I mean, even doing this research, I relocated to psychological medicine in 2005. The reason I had to relocate was because my department became so uptight about the research that I was doing. So I found myself moving from one department to another because of the nervousness that the original department had around the use of cannabis. Interestingly, the university administration came down on my side, and they said, look, these guys have been really unreasonable. But unfortunately, the supervisors I had at the time spat the dummy, and it became increasingly apparent that, in fact, just coming back to that conversation, Rodney, that we had about the older people laughing and stuff like that, when I went to my supervisors, this is the moment I actually realised this isn't going to work. I had done all the field work by this stage, which was 80 interviews, which were about an hour long each, plus all these questionnaires, which you'll see in a minute. And I was starting to talk about the themes that were coming out as to what you do when you do ethnographic work. You read through all this stuff, you draw the themes out, and I started talking about these themes. And this supervisor said, well, yes, but they just talk gibberish. Meaning people who use cannabis, all they can do is talk. Well, she said gibberish, and I actually thought it was gibberish, so I didn't go. But her response, and this comes back to that, this idea about sort of, it's humorous, and they just laugh at it, and it's all kind of fun, and it's not really like an insidious thing. But the idea that, we don't have to take anything seriously that these people say because they are on drugs, and they won't be capable of making any kind of conversation. I personally feel, my own personal view, is that moving away from the prohibition we've got at the moment will reduce the barriers to education. and will allow possibilities, I think, of having greater conversation about it. I think one of the confusions people have when they think about softening up, they describe it, or opening up drug laws, is they think, oh, there's going to be all these people using cannabis. Well, probably, if the statistics in New Zealand suggest that something like 16% of people don't use cannabis because it's illegal. The great majority of people who don't use cannabis because they don't like the effects, they're into their health to the extent that they feel it's going to undermine their health in terms of smoking. And so the reasons for the power of illegality and prohibition to stop people from using cannabis is actually really quite low. And even if there were a few more people using cannabis, you have to trade that off against the benefits of being able to talk about it in a rational way without all these sort of salacious arguments and salacious comments being made about it, you know. And so it's harm minimisation is about the net harm reduction, whereas prohibition is about reducing use. And those are two quite different things.